All right, since so many people are gone, let me just do the announcements and the recording. I apologize for not getting your grading to you this weekend. That was my plan. Some of you have got assignments that have been out there for more than a week, and that's just not normal for me. But I'm trying to get to them quickly as I can. But on the other hand, I also want to study the things that you did in there and learn from them, and I haven't had time to do that yet. So maybe I'll just grade them in a way that other instructors grade. I'll run it. If it runs, then you get your points. Worry about all the rest of the stuff later. But I think there's probably going to be some interesting techniques in that classes assignment that you have tackled that I want to study and see what I can learn from. The other thing I want to mention is that the assignment for Unit 4 is basically good. We haven't changed that much. The assignment doesn't talk about Objective-C, so it should be just fine. I looked it over, and maybe there's a little thing here and there, but it's not serious. This assignment is ready to go. If you see something there that sounds like it's Objective-C, just try to translate. For instance, somewhere here it says create an array. This is kind of small. It says create an array. Feel free to use a collection, a dictionary, whatever you want to use if that helps you solve the problem. Basically, this is a password change screen that you're going to be developing for iOS, where the user puts in their current password and then types in a new one and confirms it and then changes it. The basic assignment, you change it and it checks to make sure that your current password is accurate, checks to make sure that your new password matches the confirmation, checks to make sure that they meet the minimum password requirements that have been set. And that's it, just checks them all. If you wish in the extra credit, you create an array of passwords. There's 3 passwords. There's a home, school, and work password. There's an array of passwords, and if you change them, you could save them. It's not a requirement, but that's the next step up. So the challenge here, and you should be able to do a pretty good chunk of this after today. I think today I don't know that we're going to get all the way through Unit 4, but pretty darn close. What we don't finish today, we'll finish Wednesday. And then you should be able to start laying this out if you're looking for something to do. Start laying this out and maybe making a few connections and those kinds of things. So that assignment's pretty good, ready to go. I wouldn't trust the evaluation sheet as far as I could throw it though. Might give you some ideas, but those are all still Objective-C based and I need to change them over. I have posted new notes. They're on my website. Down to wherever the yellow highlighting is. I've finished. That's not it. These tips are always highlighted yellow. So I've finished all the way down to this alert view style. I have not had a chance to check that new syntax out. So that's as far as I got. But everything else down to that page is up to date. And I'll finish it next chance I get. So let's review what we did last time. We laid a bunch of stuff on the form last time. Get back to where I wanted to be. There we go. Put a bunch of stuff on the form in Objective-C using the screen layout, the storyboard. This is called a scene. Lots and lots of buttons over here and lots of features. Pick an object. These are its attributes, but this little icon at the top has to be selected. We've seen some sizing. We're going to be in here. We're going to be into the identity inspector today. We'll look at a big chunk of these. But in order to change the way this appears at design time, kind of like the Visual Studio properties, you need to make sure that you have the attributes inspector open. Very common mistake is I can't see those. You've got to be able to find this button at the top here to make that happen. So we put a bunch of objects on the form. If you're following along, this application itself should be up on OneDrive if you want to download the zip file and extract it. I do want to close it again real quick and show you that once you have a project that's complete, you can use the Xcode Launchpad to launch it because it should be there under recent, or you can just go find the project file, which is this one, and double click it and it'll open it up that way. This one is the objects outline. If that one's open on yours, you can close it with this little button down here. What all the buttons do will just make you crazy after a while. You do get used to them. Okay. Click it, and that one, the outline view, we don't need very much. That one is in my notes now, and if you need to, you can click it down here to open it again. We'll use it a little later. What I'd like you to do first is remove the date picker. We're not going to do any code with that. You can play with it in the future if you want. It's not required for your password application, so I'm just going to delete it and move my image up and make, actually, yeah, that'll work. Pull this up, and here's my button. And the last thing we did was added a button. A little later in my notes, there's a little segment in there that talks about how do I make buttons look like buttons? I like buttons. This is just text. If you want to make it look like a button, easiest thing to do is just add a back color, but you have to scroll through its properties here to find the back color. The default is basically transparent. If you wish, you can then choose a lighter color and it'll give it a background so that you can see it. If you want your buttons to look like buttons, but again, the new iOS 7, this is 7, so it's still an 8. It's not really buttons, it's just text. But you can still make buttons if that's what you like, and I'll show you another technique for rounding that because that's what they used to look like. I can show you that when we're done. The next thing we did is we brought in or opened up the assistant editor. When you're doing screens, once they're laid out, next you want to see the code that goes with that, and you can see them side by side. It is possible to switch by simply going to the View Controller Swift over here, but particularly here as we're creating and wiring things, it's very convenient to be able to see both at the same time. So I'm going to open up this inspector, the one that looks like a little tie or a little butler's uniform, I guess is what that's supposed to be. Click on it, now you get dual screens. One that includes the code, and over here I thought I had the view controller, but it looks like I've managed to switch to something different. I thought I closed that. Reset, it is there. This thing popped back in on me again, make that go away. Alright, then you can resize these and kind of shift them around. As long as you can see most of this screen, you should be okay.
You can hide that left panel.
We can hide this panel, we can hide that panel using these buttons up here. Once you've gotten to this stage, you shouldn't need this one too much. Okay, so I'm going to take his advice and hide it. Now I've got a little more room for my code. Over here, you won't need too much of this either, though we will be bouncing back into here a little bit later. The next thing I showed you how to do is how to create actions and outlets. I think we stuck with just outlets as a starter. I take it back, we did create an action. Here's an action for the button. Okay. To create outlets provide you the ability to inspect an object. It's like a text box. If you want to see what its text is, you have to have an outlet so that you can look in it. If you want to change the properties of an object, you have to have an outlet so that you can say textbox.text equals the empty string, wipe it out. Or label.background, text color, in this case, is green. So in order to change it, you have to have an outlet. So here's my outlet for the label so that I can change it, and I can also change its text. Or I can inspect it and look in the text and assign that to something else, pull the text out. Anything, if you want to look at a property, you've got to have an outlet. And the property includes text of text boxes. A little later, we're going to add checkboxes. Switches, they're called here, and segments are kind of like radio buttons. We're going to add those, and sliders. If you want to see what's the current slider value, you've got to have an outlet to find out what its value is. If you want to change it, you've got to have an outlet. If, on the other hand, you want to respond to an event, you need an action. An action is an event handler, and it's defined in Swift as a function with an IB action. I don't want to call that a type necessarily, and it's not a return type. It's almost a subclass of type. It's a responder to this. This is new, the way this is laid out, and I'm not quite sure the way they've described it. We did discover that initially when you open your view controller, there's a view did load. That's kind of like form load. So in this case, what we said is when we load the form, change the subtitle text. This one must be the subtitle. How do you know an object's name? The object inspector, that one I closed, would tell me that. Okay, so there's a label, but that still doesn't tell me its name. let's close that again, trying to remember, I did name this thing. If I touch this circle, it points to that. Right? And notice it highlighted it on the left. If I touch this circle, it points to my button, and it shows me that these are tied together. This doesn't tell me the name of that object, but it does tell me that this outlet is tied to it. This outlet is tied to it, and I've given it a name of LBL subtitle. So if you're trying to figure out which action, which outlet is attached to which objects, just hover over the little button on the left, and it'll give you the information that you need. So yes, that's my subtitle, and we changed its color, and we changed its text on view load. Let me run this. I think I'm going to change this to an iPhone 5, just to keep it a little bit smaller. I don't think it makes much difference. When I ran my test program this morning, I got a new error that wasn't there before. I don't know if it's because I've been switching betas and those kind of things. Not here, so that's good. Got a new error. If an error pops up, often the suggestion is put an exclamation mark on the end because this is an optional type. Any class is basically an optional type. I clicked on that, it put the exclamation mark in for me, and then everything was fine. So if you do have an error that's popping up that wasn't there before, try clicking on the error and getting the help that's there, and it'll do it for you if you do it right. All right, while that's loading, how did we create these? We created them by simply pointing to the object, and we are going to want this text box. So let's grab that text box. You simply point to the object and then control drag it. And what I've been doing is putting my outlets down here. I'm sorry, my actions down here and my outlets up here. So it's kind of like a variable up here, and it's a method down here. So decide which one that you're doing. I'm going to write code for that text box. So I'm going to grab it as an outlet, or as an action, excuse me. And I'm going to name this txt name. And this is an action, so I should have some kind of event handler. What did I call it? Let's just call it leave. I think it's in my notes someplace. It's just an example of how to add it. I changed it to action, give it a name. This is the event name. Right, oh, there it is. Editing did end. Right, so leave, editing did end, done editing, call it whatever you like, but this is the event that we're responding to. This is the name of the function that's going to respond to that event. We can have this method respond to any object or just text fields. If you change it to text fields, it'll only handle text fields. If you ever have an object or an event handler that responds to different kinds of objects, then just leave that alone as any object. I've read some sources that say, doesn't matter, leave it in any object, doesn't hurt you. Right? Except the sender has a type of unknown type versus, just notice I do have a sender here, has an unknown type instead of a text field type. The rest of this I pretty much leave alone unless you want to change the event. Okay, and actually in this one, instead of editing did end, I want did end on exit. You'll see why in just a little bit. Did end on exit. We are going to have a sender, connect it, and it creates a function for you that you can then run. Right. Now, why did that get chopped off? Click the button, it should turn green. It did, but looks like it kind of got chopped off. So I'm going to go change the size of that label, but my application is still running, or still working. I might have, wasn't there an auto size to stretch this thing? Maybe. Text align center, and check that again real quick. That's better. Okay, so that's where we came from. Last thing we were doing was creating outlets and actions. Actions are methods, functions that you can write code in, and this is a whole lot easier than it used to be. View did load automatically executes when you load. So let's go to my notes now and see what else I'm supposed to be doing. Did that, open the assistant editor, create an outlet to one of the labels, give it a name, we called it label subtitle. Okay, add a button. If you want to, make it a light gray or something background so it looks a little more like a button, and define a click action for that button. Okay, and we did, and we changed the text color. We could do anything in here. We can change the text itself, or we can change the text color, or whatever we want to do in here. The big challenge is just figuring out, we had to do a little digging to find the color and find out what the name of the property is. That's its challenge after you start building these things. But everything now is in dot notation. You might see some old examples. If you see old examples and they have square brackets around them, particularly in my notes, they have square brackets around it. That's an old message, is what they used to be called. A message is a call to a function. And part of the message was parameters. And the way you did that in Objective-C was with square brackets. Anytime I see those square brackets in my notes, I try to figure out the new dot notation way to do it. If I can't figure it out, I Google it, there it is, and I put that in. The messages, for the most part, seem to have gone away. One of the things we discovered is that when you have a text box like this, and you click in it to give it focus, the keyboard comes up, but it never goes away. Even if I'd left my date picker here, the keyboard doesn't go away. So and that's annoying. So one of the first things I tried to figure out last year is, how do I get this keyboard to go away when I click on the return button, or when I click outside here, any place, make the thing go away, so that when the text box gets focused, it automatically grabs the keyboard, but it doesn't lose focus. To me, that's kind of a flaw in the logic there, but they want to keep it open for some reason. I don't know why. I want the keyboard open after I leave my text box. So the first thing we're going to do is write some code that responds to the return key, basically, and that's what we've written here with our text name that responds to the event. And how do I know which event it's responding to? I can see this. If I want to know which event this is responding to, can't see it in the name. Might be worth a description. Okay? Instead of leave, maybe I should have said did exit on return, or whatever that thing was called. If you do want to see that, though, what this is tied to, you can switch the view over here. Where to go?
Click on the
I'm going to click on the code. I'm in slow down mode here, but no, still not getting it. Code. Missing my icon up there.
Yeah, click on the text box and go in.
Okay, then I can do, thank you. Then I can do the event description here, connections inspector. Okay, there's the text box, did end on exit. Maybe embedding that in the name like Visual Studio does is not a bad idea, so that you can determine what that does. Okay. But my leave name isn't too bad. So now inside there, I'm going to write some code. But what code? Well, that's where the notes come in. I had to do a little bit of digging. Right. And this still has some square brackets, and I don't think those are necessary. I must have missed that. Right. But what we're going to do is basically say, for whoever the sender was, there's a command that says resign first responder. Sounds like an EMS class or something, medical services, but that's basically focus. Right. What we know of as focus in Visual Studio is the first responder. Who has focus? And you can resign the first responder, or you can set the first responder. So what I'm going to do in here is say sender dot, and then resign first responder. And that's all you need. You don't even need the square brackets anymore. So what we're basically saying here, what we're basically saying is when they click the return button, because remember the event name, as funky as it was did end on exit. The exit is that return button. And when they click the return button, resign first responder, and when it's not the first responder anymore, the keyboard goes away. So you could put a comment out here that says hide the keyboard. And let's test that. Click. And I can type something. I don't even have to type something, but as soon as I hit the return button, the keyboard goes away. That's good. What's not good, however, or what's not as good, is that many apps allow you to tap outside or tap in some space someplace, and that makes the keyboard go away. The way to do that is a little more complicated. To make the keyboard go away when we click anywhere or touch anywhere. Remember, when we're clicking, we're not really clicking. Nobody has a clicker on their iPad or on their iPhone. They're touching. Our click is simply a simulator of that. The nice thing about the simulator is we can also type on our keyboard instead of having to go VOLKER using the little bitty keyboard here. That gets annoying real fast. Okay. To do that, we have to get a little more creative. What we have to do is basically have the form background respond to an event. But the scene, I should say form, the scene's background is simply a view, and views don't respond to an event. So the first thing we have to do in order to get the background to respond to an event is change its type. Instead of making it a view, we have to change its type to a UI control. But we didn't create it, it just popped up. True enough. To change its type, we have to go into that outline view. This little button on the very bottom of your storyboard opens up that outline view that I've been closing because it's taking up space that I wanted for my screen. We have to open that up, and at the very top is the view. Okay. And what we want to do, and now we want to inspect that object, and that's this button if I remember right, Identity Inspector, there it is. What we want to do is change its type from view to a control. Because if it's a control, then it can have events. It's a little disconcerting because when you start typing here UI control, that's not on the list. Oh, it is today. It wasn't yesterday. It is today. So now I've changed the background of my form, its type, to a control. Press enter, and now over here, it's called a control. If you're wondering how the heck I figured this out, the book from last year, the iOS 7 book, was decent. I haven't gone to look if Apress has an iOS 7 book that was pretty good. If you can find one used. I have not seen or looked to see if they have an iOS 8 Swift book yet. I doubt it, because it hasn't even been officially released until next week. So I doubt they'll have a book for it. But I also have another source, and I've asked you to kind of keep an eye on sources and update our wiki on that. But I have another source, the Wenderlich site, and I have a link in my new notes here that I'll show to you in a little bit. So it's not this stuff that's intuitive to me. You know, how do I make the text box go away when I just touch anywhere? Well, you have to change the background into a control and then create an event for that. Oh yeah, sure. That's what I would have thought of. Other people have figured this out, and you and I are just stealing it. And that's probably a good thing. So that's where it came from. Now it's a control. Going back to my notes because I can't remember how to do this. Change it into a control using the Identity Inspector. Then open your Swift file. Then go back to that utility connection inspector. My background is still selected from here. Okay, that's how I selected my view. And now over here, I'm going back to that connections inspector. And here's a did end, but I don't think that's the one we're supposed to use for the background. I think it's just touch up inside. Let's see if that's what it wants me to use. Drag or touch down. It'll go away as soon as I touch. Now we could probably do a touch up, but I'm going to do a touch down in honor of the nice Packers win. So here's my touchdown event. I'm going to grab this little circle. I cannot grab from here. I've never tried it. Maybe it's new. Let's see if I drag this from here to here. But which event did I get? That's an outlet. Action. Value changed of that control. Ooh, that doesn't sound right. Here's a touchdown, any object or a control. Argument sender can't connect. Oh, I haven't given it a name. My notes said what to call it. Call it background tap. So that would have worked. I didn't need this over here. I could have dragged from here. You can also, this is I guess kind of the point. Let me remove this one. And this also shows up in the notes a little later. I'm going to highlight this text and delete it. Gone, right? No. Just like in C#, not gone. The connection is still there. You can't simply delete an event handler because its connection is there. And then when you try to run, you get all these funky errors that nobody understands. It says, I've got this connection, it's got no code for it anymore. So I have to go back to the connection inspector and delete this as well. There's a little X there. It's kind of hard to see, but it is an X. You click that, that deletes the connection. So I control dragged it from here to here. That worked okay. We can also drag, just a simple drag, don't even need a control drag, from the collection, the outlet connections here, over here. And it creates an action automatically. So in a way, it's a little easier because I don't have to hold the control key. I don't have to designate that I want an action because that's all these are. Just have to give it a name. Touchdown sender, connect. I think I got the same event. I wasn't paying close attention, but I'm thinking I got the same event. Now, what do we want to do in here? Well, I don't want to reassign the first responder of my background. But I want to resign the first responder of the text box that had control before it. You can't. How do I know who had control before I tapped on the background? I can't. So the only thing you can do in the background tap event is basically go through every text box that could have been the first responder, could have brought up the keyboard, and resign it. Well, in order to create that then, I think I can close this now. In order to make that happen, I have to have an outlet for my text box. Because I want to change the text box. I want to be able to refer to it by name. This is not the text box. This is an event that responds to a text box. I need to refer to the text box itself, so I'm going to control drag that up here into my outlets and call this text username. Maybe. It's a text field to connect. So now I have an object called text username, and down here I can now say text username dot. I don't know why I maybe need to do a save.
Is it TXT, not text?
Oh, thank you. TXT, there it's blue, dot, resign first responder. There it is again. Okay, and again, compared to last year, I wish I'd left some of that old stuff in there just so you could see it because it was really gross. So now what I'm doing here is basically saying when I touch anywhere on my form in the background, okay, not on an object, but on the background, then resign the text box as the first responder, basically close the keyboard. What if I tap and it's not the first responder? Then I make it the first, then I resign it as the first responder anyways. So let me just demonstrate that, and then Brittany, I'll answer your question. Go ahead with your question while that's loading up here.
Oh, so the TXT name leave, that's just if you're leaving to like another text box or something like that?
We don't need both. So hang in there, I'm gonna merge them. Okay, so now I click in here, and my text box didn't come up.
Command K.
The question is, why didn't it come up?
Maybe you would have a background tab.
I didn't tap the background. Text inside the text box should bring that back. But now clicking outside should make it go away. It does. Click it in, makes it come back. Hitting return makes it go away. They both work. Okay? So Brittany, this one is for the return key on the keyboard versus this one, which is anywhere outside of the text box. But they both do basically the same thing, right? Because this one says sender, but who's the sender? Text name leave, or the text box, excuse me. The text box is the sender, resign it. And this one says text username, resign it. They both do basically the same thing. So can we merge them somehow? Yes. First thing I'm going to do is remove my text name responder. My handler here, I'm going to remove that. Remember, if you delete the code, you also have to go into the text boxes collection here and delete this, because the text name leave code is gone. Have to delete it. Then, if I want to tie this object to an existing event handler, it's already there. Remember, we did that in Visual Studio. We went into the little lightning bolt and dropped down a list and said, on click, use this method. Tie it, wire them both together is the way it's referred to, at least it used to be in iOS. I have two choices. I can control drag from here to here, and notice it turns blue. Okay, and that's not bad, except for one thing. Don't follow me here because it's going to mess it up. Notice which event it signed it to. Editing did end. At least according to my source, that's not the right event, because it won't get rid of the keyboard. So it assigned it to the wrong event. So that's not what I want. So the advantage of coming from here is I can grab the right one, and it did end on exit, and park it down here. Hit return, still goes away. Click the background, it goes away. What happens if I click on the picture? Still goes away. Because I think that picture is kind of showing through. One more, let's do the label, still goes away. Okay, so that's giving me at least the functionality that I want. I want that keyboard out of the way when I'm done with the text box. Let's create a second text box just to see that we can tie even more of them together. So username, and what else might we want? Let's just do phone number. I'm going to copy this label, and I'm going to copy the text box. To copy, you have to select them both, shift click, and then I believe it's option drag. Now I have to remember to go back to the attributes inspector button over here, the one that looks like a little slider thingy. Click on that and change the text of this one to phone number. Okay, and then for my text box, change its placeholder to, let's do pound, pound, pound. Those not pounds. Pound, 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 dot, pound, pound, pound. So we know what kind of format we want. I'm not going to be typing anything in these things. The validation is a whole nother exercise later on. For right now, just allow it to enter. Now I want to wire this. Well, as we saw, I can simply click on it, go to its collections, and then, oh look, there's already one there. Why? Because I copied it. And this is causing my programming logic students all kinds of grief because they create the exit button. They create the event handler because it's simple. And then they copy the button. And to clear, and clear is wired to exit. They click on clear and the program ends. And they ask me, why the heck is that? And I look at the code. I have no idea. Took me a little while, but I found it. And then I realized what they did. All right, so I'm teaching them differently. Create all your buttons first, then start wiring them up, creating event handlers for them. But in this case, in our case, this is exactly what we want, because now my second button, or my second text box, also responds to this event. Right, and I can touch on this and notice now when I hover here, it highlights all the things that respond to this, and because the background is part of it, it's kind of hard to tell. You can click on this and it'll tell you that these three objects are all responding to that event. And so if I run this again, So that's something to keep in the back of your mind. If you wanted to respond to the same event, like text boxes to the did leave event, then copy it. But if you don't, go into the connection inspector and delete them. You don't. It's no big deal. If you copy a button that already has an event handler linked to it, just delete the link. Why is it taking so long?
Did you stop and run the thing, or did you just play?
No, it'll do it on its own. Stuck. Okay, so now we have our second box. I can click in there, but if I click in here, the keyboard change stays because it's another text box. I can click out, or I can click in here and return, in here and return, and I guess my philosophy is that's the way it ought to work.
Click on the phone and then on the form.
It doesn't work.
Click on the phone.
Yep, and then the background, it doesn't go away.
Because of your code, it says one specific text box to use.
Right, good. Thank you. So what do we got to do? What happened here is we've lost the responder to this one, but this one's the one who's in charge. So when I click on the background, it says, hey, username, you're no longer the first responder. It's going, so what? I know, I'm not. So what do we got to do? We have to add every single text box to this.
Gotta make an outlet.
I have to make an outlet. Gets a little old, seems like, but you get used to it. Anything that's an input, you might as well make an outlet for it because you're probably going to either extract what's in it or change it. So I'll call this text phone. Go ahead.
When you copy an object that connects the same object or the two objects to the same action, does it also do the output?
No, obviously not because it didn't do it here, right? It's not called, we can't have two objects with the same outlet name. We can have two objects that respond to the same event handler or use the same event handler, but we can't assign two names to two different objects. So now down here, I should be able to say text phone dot resign first responder.
Could you do it's an app, so you probably never would have that many text boxes, but like
Right.
for each UI text field?
So you're basically writing a loop that says for every object in my, you'd have to figure out how to get to the collection of objects on your form.
Okay.
And I don't think it's as simple as for each UI text field because there has to be a collection of them someplace. If you could find the collection, what we would do in C#, say for each object on my form, go through it. If it is a UI text field, then resign its first responder. Considering how many text boxes I got here, no. But if you had 20, but on a phone, I don't know that I'd want an app with 20 text boxes on one form. Probably have multiple scenes as you go. Test that one. There we go. And so you should be able to cover that with one event handler to handle all the get rid of the keyboard events. Just keep dragging objects to that, or create your text boxes after you've tested it on one, and then they'll all link to that. But you do have to tweak this function to get rid of every text box, to go through each one and say, give it up, give it up, give it up, knowing that one of them has to be the right one. Does it cause any trouble when there's no keyboard and I tap the background? No. Questions about first responder, getting rid of that keyboard. Okay. Let's see what else I've got in here. And there's my notes that say repeat this, put this line of code without the square brackets, put this line of code in every one of those fields or in that background tap event so that you get rid of every text box. We just talked about how to connect multiple objects to the same action. Two ways to do it. If it already exists, simply drag it to the event handler until that box turns blue. The downside of doing it that way is you get the default handler, whatever that is. If you don't want that default event to be linked to that handler, you want a different one, then my advice is instead select the object and use the connection inspector to grab the event that you want and just bring it down here. Almost easier. If you can keep track of all these different views. There's 6 of them in this area alone, and keeping track of which one does what where can be a little confusing. But that's because we're doing this a couple times a week instead of 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, like all good iOS programmers should be doing it, right? What else we got here? Yeah, we did that. Note the wrong event. Yeah, we did that. Run it. Yep, did that. Referencing outlets. We've done most of that already. I changed the label name. We can also say take the text and put it into a variable. Notice that my variable is not typed. Why not? It's inferred. Just like when we had text and strings and everything else, we can infer the type. Once I transfer it from the text box into a variable, I don't expect to change it, so I used a let instead of a var. It's basically a local constant now. And this warning I thought we saw before, I must have it in the wrong place above here. It makes a little more sense. If you change the text and it doesn't appear, this is a little clue. They maybe have cleaned that up. We did talk about viewing the connections. If you want to know who's connected to what, these dots in your view controller are your clue. You hover and it shows you who responds to that. Who is this? Who is this? Who is that? Interesting.
That happened twice for me.
Okay. What else is in my notes here? It's about time for a break. If you want to see which objects respond to what or what an object responds to. Right now we're seeing who responds to this. Right? But if you want to see the other way around, here's my phone number. What events does it respond to? You need to begin the connections inspector and you can see all the different events. And just like before, we can respond to different kinds of events for one object. So I could take another one of these dots, drag it down here, make it another event that responds when you drag and let go, or drag and exit. We talked about removing actions. To remove an action, you have to go into the connection inspector, okay, find that little X, and delete it. You can't just delete the code. Okay, or if you have a connection and you want to leave the code, but you want to remove the connection for some reason, you can do that. Just go remove the connection. It has no effect on the actual code itself. But if you delete code, if I delete this, my button will still be connected to that event with that name, and that's not a good plan. So if you want to get rid of one of these, just like in C#, go get rid of the connection as well. All right, let's pause there. We'll come back. We'll do a few other things.